am joined by Daryl Michel. Welcome, Daryl, beaming into us from Southern Texas. Am I right?
You're correct. Yes.
Awesome. It's so great to be spending some time with you this morning. And as you know, when we hosted Dr. Jan Hasbrook here in New Zealand a little while ago, I was in the car with her actually in Christchurch, and she was sharing with me all of your great work. So it's a real honour to be speaking with you in what is our morning, and I know it's your afternoon on a Sunday afternoon as you prepare for a big week ahead. So huge welcome from all of us here in New Zealand.
It's great. Thank you for having me.
So I'm just going to do a little intro to have our listeners and our followers know a little bit more about you and about your work, Daryl. Daryl's education profession began in the mid-1990s as a classroom teacher in an independent school district in San Antonio, Texas. That sounds so cool for those of us here in New Zealand. Experience and opportunity led him to instructional coaching and leadership positions with a research-based program founded at Johns Hopkins University and opportunities to collaborate with educators nationally. And in 2005, Daryl grounded himself back in Texas, where he completed his PhD in education school improvement at Texas State University, continuing to live in the space of instructional coaching while working at the University of Texas in Austin. And today, Daryl, we know that you continue this passion, engaging with others where you're learning all the time and advocating for voices and perspectives to be heard. And I just want to share from the outset, I know I said this to you, but I want to let everybody know this wonderful book of Daryl and Jan's is the next on my reading list, and really looking forward to digging into and perhaps a little bit of what we call front loading for those who haven't come across that book, to go into some questions and chat today about student-focused coaching.
Yeah.
So let's begin with what actually is student-focused coaching, Daryl.
Wow. So, well, first, thank you for that introduction. It's hard to believe that it's been 30 plus years in this profession already. And, just the love of not only being able to stay in this work of coaching and student focused coaching, I also still get to continue to work with faculty at the University of Texas at Austin, the Meadows Center. And yeah, it's kind of the best of all worlds, I guess, right now of what I get to do. And I think that probably what makes the most sense to describe student focused coaching is to start with the definition of what Jan and I came up with in terms of many iterations here, and then maybe pulling some of this apart a little bit. And so how we define student focused coaching was that it's a cooperative, ideally collaborative. Are really key points there that I'll come back to. Professional relationship with colleagues who are mutually engaged in efforts that help to maximize every teacher's skills and knowledge to enhance student learning. And I think it's really important there to start at that beginning, cooperative, ideally collaborative, because being so much in like a coaching space, it can seem like you're forced on to people. It can sometimes feel like, oh, it's hierarchical, it's evaluative, and just to get someone to cooperate with you can take a whole lot of time, right? To really understand who you are, what you do, how am I going to help you? So that if you can establish really this opportunity to get others to want to work with you, hey, maybe it will eventually evolve into a collaborative partnership. So simply to say that we're going to come together and we're going to collaborate, it seems like, oh, there's a lot more work to do to get to that actual space. The professional relationship with colleagues and being mutually engaged, I think, is the other part here with student focused coaching that's so important, because it is so much about positive and trusting relationships. And we know in coaching that, two big cornerstones of coaching is about trust and it's about confidentiality. So, so teachers and others to really understand that student focused coaching is not a hierarchical model.
Mm-hmm.
It's not an expertise based model. This is about us working together as peer colleagues. And so this sort of gets us to think just with that little part that there's no more knowledge that maybe I have that a
Mm,
teacher has, but we have
mm,
to really think about how we communicate with each other. And we don't base necessarily our work as student focused coaches around the kind of clinical supervision models and coaching cycles,
mm-hmm,
unless someone really wants that kind of work. But most of ours is really much more the flexible grounding everything in student data, and that's really the end part of that definition. Is that all things about student focused coaching is that we will ground all decisions with multiple sources of student data and student evidence and work with our teacher, our peer colleagues here to then think of the many ways and the many different things that we each bring to the conversation that we can then start to really think about
mm,
moving forward and determining next steps and so on.
mm.
So I think maybe that's a good way to start with thinking about
Yeah, yeah.
student focused
So
coaching.
so many great so many great things for us to pick up on. And one that I wrote down was you talked about the importance of establishing an opportunity for others to want to work with you. That's
Yeah.
something that really sat with me through that piece. And I guess that speaks to the ideally collaborative bit, right?
Uh,
So
yeah. Yeah.
um, when you were speaking, I was thinking you want to be working collaboratively with people and for them to experience the relationship not to be one where they feel things are done to them
Hmm.
for the sake
Hmm.
of them meeting somebody else's expectation.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it doesn't take long for something to start to feel evaluative in
Mm,
nature. Oh, my principal came into
mm,
my classroom, they saw this, now you should go and fix them.
mm,
That's really different than a principal talking to the teacher whom they've observed and said, "Hey, you have a really you have an individual here who can really support you, and that's your
mm,
coach." But it's really
mm,
different there to not cross over the feeling evaluative or in a supervisory role. And the other thing, just to add to that too, that I'm glad you picked up on that, is that I think it's to me from my many years of experience in the coaching space. I did start off my career when I was started working at Johns Hopkins University uh, in a real technical coaching space
mhm,
and going into classrooms and like, but this is how this program is meant to be taught. And over the years, I've really thought about that. Of I only was going to these schools like once, maybe, or maybe once every 3 months or so.
mhm.
And that here I come for 10 or 15 minutes in your classroom, and that, how do I have solutions for you? And I'm like, oh, like all this time, like just thinking over
I
time.
know.
I
I'm sort of
miss.
laughing because I can 100% resonate with that, and some of the work that we do ourselves. It's yeah. So I want to go to our next question, but I do want to. I have this kind of thought around how do you collaborate? What are some ways that you have experienced that you work to build that successful collaboration? And I guess the collaboration is a byproduct of the trust and the confidentiality and the
Yeah,
high relationships that you've got, the quality relationships that you've
yeah.
got going on, right?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And I would say that in getting to kind of continuing to build this trusting, confidential relationship where we are these partners is we write about what we call the collaborative problem solving process.
Mhm,
And through the process, it is a systematic, structured 4-phase process, but
mhm,
it's still very flexible and versatile around. This could be a teacher who's come to me with an academic problem that they're facing with a student, a group of students, maybe it's a whole class. It could be a behavioral challenge. It could be a social emotional problem. And so the process is pretty open and flexible depending upon what a teacher uh, is experiencing. And the phases, the first phase that I think really, if you can be curious and really be present, ask a lot of questions, do your very best listening, that in that first phase you can allow an individual teacher, a group of teachers to express and share a problem that they're facing, uh, and all the while you're doing your best listening. You're not trying to solve anything. You're not trying to offer solutions, because in that first phase, by just, I think, being curious with people and trying to really understand what's going and not jumping to quick fixes, you create what seems like a real authentic kind of conversation with someone where you genuinely want to try to understand what this other person or these different persons are going through. And so in that first phase, that's all it is just we're trying to think of all the different things someone might bring to a conversation. And then before we ever start even thinking about any kind of actions, we consider additional data that we want to collect. And by additional data, when we would think of this through data triangulation of, I mean, a minimum of these three different data sources, that maybe what the teachers have set as a problem, okay, that's what we can go and we can try to seek this out. Uh, Interviewing, observing, looking at classroom ecology. We could look at record reviews from past, maybe behavioral, other assessment data. But it's all of that working together that when you do come back to phase two and put this out in front of you. Here's the data we've collected. What patterns do we start seeing that emerges from it? So instead of a quick fix, I know the answer, which is really hard to do because you're missing so much. We have all of this student data and evidence now that we can start to really think about of what is the real problem here. And it might be what the
mhm.
teachers initially said. It might be completely different. And
Yeah.
so no rush to solutions when might not really be sure what the problem is.
Mm, mm. So many things that you're saying are resonating, and I'm reflecting on my own practice as a coach, Daryl, as you're speaking, and um, I'm going to go backwards in this little summary. But when you said, what is the problem here? That is a question. What is the problem here, or what is the challenge here, or however we frame it, is something that I wonder on reflection in my own practice that I don't sit for long enough in, and I
Mhm,
potentially don't gather enough evidence, or
mhm,
different sources of evidence, like you were suggesting, and those phases that you've explained to us. Um, I see a parallel in our work. As I mentioned to you previously, we have been springboarding from, as learning to coach, we've been springboarding from Jim Knight's impact cycle. And
yeah.
so, yeah, and so when you talk about phase one and being curious and being present and doing your best listening, I liken that to his identify stage, where we're determining what the state of the nation is. So
Mhm,
I think it's really important for all of us. when listening to conversations such as this, to stop and reflect on what we do, what our process looks like, what our purpose is, how deep do we actually go, and
Mm-hmm.
are we really there for the coachee? I think that's a question
Mm-hmm.
that we have to be really honest about. Are we really there
Yeah.
for the coachee? And the answer
Yeah.
must be yes, we are.
Yeah.
And if it's not, we might need to think about that. But are we really there for the coachee? And um, how are we being curious? But how are we bringing them into showing them that this is a collaboration? It's again
Mm-hmm.
not something that's being done to them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and just something, Carla, too, that as you talk about that and you say it, that, the one, having Jim write the foreword for
Mm,
student focused
mm,
coaching, and you'll see as well, and others. I mean, he talks too in the foreword about coaching being this inside out, not an
mm,
outside in.
yeah.
And I 100% agree with that.
Mm,
Like really trying to understand, and that goes back to like giving the voice, giving the
mm,
agency to an individual. But I think also the other part of as you're talking and reflecting too is that showing that I am cooperating with you and trying to build this collaborative partnership. That within the phase 2 of the collaborative problem solving process really shines through as there as well, because when you're able to write a problem definition from this data you collected, it's now both of us being mutually involved in thinking about, so what are a goal or goals that might help to solve this problem? And then what do we each then bring to the conversation of possible strategies or actions that we might take? But each of those actions, withholding judgment for what someone brings of what they know what they know, listing these up, but allowing the teacher to take control of this, and you continue to sort of manage the process. But if a teacher chooses a strategy, and let's say it's a worksheet, we're going to take that worksheet and say, so completing this one, is that going to achieve this goal and then solve this problem? Probably not. So that can go off the list. But you're still heavily involved in communicating with someone and asking a lot of questions as you evaluate strategies to achieve a goal, to solve a problem, without those really quick, impatient kind of reactions of, I
yeah.
need to solve this. I'm the coach.
And do you find that through that process that um, that you, because you've learnt those skills through those phases of, I'm going to say, considered collaboration, considered data gathering, considered solution finding and goal setting. But the word considered, for some reason, Daryl, is
Mm, mm,
really, really
uh,
landing for me right now through all of
uh,
your chat. And do
yeah.
you find that as a result of working alongside teachers in this type of process, that they too learn how to be deeper in their reflections, to be more considered in their reactions and responses to situations?
Mhm,
Do you find that that's
mhm,
an outcome
mhm,
of sort of supporting them in their professional, in their true professional growth
mhm,
as
mhm.
a professional reflective practitioner?
Yeah, I really do. I really do. And I think if talking to some coaches, what they would say as well is that the process helps to strengthen
Mm,
relationships with different
mm,
individuals.
mm,
I think coaches, I think you'll hear from many coaches, they'll also talk about so much about their own awareness of what they're doing in a conversation, both the
mm,
nonverbal techniques or cues that they're giving off. Like when you're engaged with someone in this process, even if you video recorded for 5 minutes or verbally recorded responses for 5 minutes, the awareness factor of
yeah.
how what is my body language saying? What are my facial features communicating? So many things that I think coaches would say as well, that I learned so much just through
Yeah.
the process about myself,
Hmm.
while also really strengthening some of the relationships with others.
Yeah, yeah. So
Mhm.
let's springboard from there, talking about body language, and let's sit in that space of communication for a moment. What
Mhm.
is the role of communication in student focused coaching? Tell us a little bit about the role of communication and what you've seen works incredibly well for both the coach and the coachee.
Yeah, so one chapter that's devoted to communication for collaboration
Mm,
is what we title it. Uh, and the importance of that, because that has to run throughout everything that we're doing. And so in student focused coaching, uh, we do introduce and build on a technique that we call solar,
mm-hmm,
SOLER.
mm-hmm,
And in the solar technique, this, as we model, demonstrate, practice, in this is the first, that S, as how we sit, just sitting squarely with someone,
mm,
getting out from behind this big scary desk sometimes, that might resonate with some people as power, or you are a decision maker over there, or you're an evaluator, but moving yourself in such ways where you can be face to face with someone. And principals as well find, there's one in particular already that she just was talking about this too, of getting up and moving, that how much more comfortable the conversation is when you just get next to someone. The O, about an open posture. And so when you think about just, yeah, how you do sit, you're leaning forward, just that slight inclination, all these things that suggest something. You're with them, you're not bored, you're not turned off. E, for eye contact. R, thinking about making a coaching conversation as relaxing as possible, so it's not high, feeling really intense. And those are just a few that
mm,
that we adapted from Egan and Rowe's research, and knowing that you have to also be very culturally responsive here. I
mm,
mean, that is
mm.
just, those are a few actions.
Yeah.
Really understanding who you're working with. So that, in terms of some of the nonverbal, and then building off of some of the work from STARS research in the early 2000s, and then some from the Growth Coaching International group around the different types of listening. And when you start to think about these different types of listening, from really working with people to understand cosmetic listeners who are so busy multitasking. What's the other people? What's the other person
Mm,
feeling like?
mm,
Or conversational. Or then we get to the active, deep, and authentic
mm,
listening. Like, can you really put yourself in this space of being an authentic listener where you're all in? And then in the student focused coaching book, then we then also talk about verbal responses to some of that. So that would include things like, how do you paraphrase when
mm,
you're in a conversation? Uh, your skills for summarizing, the types of questions that you ask, the minimal encouragers that you use. Those nodding of the head, the right, something that suggests you're with them. And so
yeah.
those are a couple of the bigger parts in student focused coaching. And then we use this, after going through an experience. Then we use it in triads for practice opportunities,
Hmm.
where you get to practice being a coach, you get to practice being a colleague, and you get to practice being an observer. So
Hmm.
chapter 4 devoted exclusively for the communication for
Mm,
collaboration. Uh, so then when you apply to what I was talking about, the collaborative problem solving process, then you also are needing to be aware of,
yeah.
what are you doing in this conversation.
Wow. Can you tell me, please? What's the L in the solar?
The L is lean. So
Lean.
it's
Okay,
about
sorry,
yep,
I
yep.
missed that. So I've
Yep,
got
the L is for that slight
okay,
leaning forward. So
yeah,
we have sit squarely, open posture, the lean, the eye
lean.
contact,
Mm.
and
Relaxing.
relax.
Yeah, that's
Mhm.
amazing. It's really interesting when I chat with people how you see that. I mean, I chat with people online, but also when I'm coaching myself in an in-person situation, the lean is huge. I think the lean is huge because it's such a great indicator, isn't it? If, you know, people are if they are feeling relaxed and ready maybe to collaborate a little bit more.
Yeah, yeah. Versus the kind of way back in chair
Yeah,
and
or the not
arms
sitting squarely
crossed.
on
Like,
because really I just don't really want to be here, and but I I'm really grateful, Daryl, that you have pointed that out through the course of this chat, but also, we can obviously go into the text and read about it in more
yeah,
detail. But I think what we're saying is that possibly in both of our experience, all of those 5 points are very, very real. They're very
yes,
real in a coaching conversation, and they
yeah,
give us great insights. And I think
yeah.
they can help us to know
Mhm.
where we're at with building that collaborative relationship with the coachee.
Even like I think of our conversation, in Zoom or in Teams or whatever platform, there's so much that I think that you can take from someone. Our
Mm,
eyes, yeah,
mm,
might go off different places, but it so
mm,
would it if we were sitting in front of each other. And so the challenge sometimes that I think when we're in the virtual space is that when people don't want cameras on, and then it's like,
mm.
wow, you don't really maybe realize how much of
Yeah,
those nonverbal cues you
yeah.
really rely on.
Mm, mm,
That comes from. We'll put this in this next instructional leadership book about these different levels as well, and that comes from a Harvard Business Review article about
mm-hmm,
levels of listening, and you think that the very first level is safety. And
mm,
so I think so much about this
mm,
too, like, yeah,
mm,
you the nonverbal and the verbal responses, how important all of this plays when we think about coaching with
mm,
someone. If it's
mm,
not safe or they feel threatening, then where's this going? Where's this going to go?
mm.
Um, and
Yeah.
and in that same Harvard Business Review article, it's it's also talking about, it's what great listeners actually do. I think that's the title. It also talks about how, just through these nonverbal communication cues, that it goes on to talk about 80% of communication comes from nonverbal
Mm,
cues. and
mm,
and I guess, yeah, the more I think about this, the more I'm like, that really could be true in a lot of instances
mm,
of being deeply connected to the other
mm.
person whom you're talking with.
Yeah. So so many things for us to be thinking about all the time when we're communicating with others, right? I know myself, I am have a huge value of generosity. So I'm often wanting to help and kind of come to solutions. But I've really had to work on that. And I've had to also work on the fact that as an extrovert, who I often like the opportunity to talk my way to understanding.
Mm,
And so I
mm,
have to
mm,
be
mm,
really mindful in a coaching conversation not to, for lack of better terms, sabotage the
mm,
conversation
mm.
for my benefit
Yeah,
over my coachee's benefit.
yeah,
Because we do a lot of learning ourselves in a coaching conversation, don't we? And so
yeah,
I have to sort of squash them. So we have to
yeah,
really, really be aware of self so much
yeah, yeah, yeah.
in this
That's
situation and who we are,
yeah,
how we
mhm,
present, and to know ourselves so, so well to be the
yeah,
best and to give the best and dare I say only the best to our coachee.
yeah.
It's
Hmm.
challenging.
Yeah, yeah. Christian Van Nurburg, who he talks about some of the things to stop doing in
Mm,
conversation. That I think too that, not always thinking about this, but when you think of, you try to fill in what someone is saying and you try to just
mm,
fill that in, like,
mm,
well, that may not be and likely
yeah.
wasn't what they were thinking. Or
Mm,
you try to understand a complex word or just throw in this
mm,
word, or the things like doodling. Well, a lot of people
mm,
doodle when they're talking, but it's like, but where are your eyes when you're
mm,
doodling? Not at that person. So
mm,
this list of things that are really interesting too, that I think
mm,
gets one to think about. What am
yeah.
I doing? Or things that I really
Mm,
need to think about, stop doing. It's not about
mm.
you. It's not competing. So it's not
So
about you
true.
in the coaching
Yeah,
conversation. So yeah, being mindful of how you keep them front and center, our
yeah.
colleagues.
What would you say as we sort of come to round off our chit chat, Daryl? What would you say are, you know, other than obviously, I'm not going to be able to wait to get into this text. After this chat, I'm going to be having to find a way to fast track my other reading. But what would you say are, your maybe three key takeaways if you were thinking of the three things that you really encouraged people who are coaching right now, and even maybe not, because sometimes
Mm,
people don't realize they're in a coaching role, right? They might be a school leader, or they
yeah.
might have someone who reaches out to them all the time, but there's no formal coaching arrangement around it. So they're in
Yeah.
interactions that influence the outcomes of others. What are three
Yeah.
things that you think
Mm, mm.
would be good for them to be thinking about from what we've talked about?
I think one of the most important things is to know, not only for you to clearly understand as a coach, what is it that you do and what is it that you don't do,
Mm,
and how has that been communicated to everyone else?
mm,
Not just I'm the coach
mm,
here, I'm the instructional coach. Well, what does that mean? So
mm,
more of a and it can't be just one time. Like, how do you continue to educate those whom you're working with around what I do, what I don't do? This is what that looks like. This is what that doesn't look like. Uh, and then having a principal or whomever it is as a partner where you can continuously revisit. And if you have as a coach a menu of services that you're communicating to others,
mm,
like this is what I do, this is what I can do, this is how I can support. That has to be an ongoing thing. So,
mm,
that can help really with relationship building. It also gives you opportunities to really continue to practice your own communication with others, uh,
mm,
to be
mm,
unambiguous in your approach, and clear with what you do. I think another really important thing for coaches and or whomever whomever hires them to be a coach in a building is to understand and make it clear that a coach, they're a peer colleague. There's not any way possible they could know everything about curriculum instruction assessments at all levels and all subject areas. It's just unrealistic. So that everyone really understands that the coaches as a peer colleague, yeah, you're working together. Don't expect for this person to have quick fix solutions, maybe unless you have a really good relationship or someone you've already worked with before. But I think that's important. I think another thing is is not relying on just one source of data or just
mm,
one data
mhm,
point, because that just tells about one instance. But take the time to really think through and to try to understand what that one piece of data might mean, uh,
mm,
and then going off to do more of the detective work with
mm,
your interviews with other teachers, with students, with family members, to do observations if that's what a teacher might be. Hey, you know what? I'd like you to come in and watch the interaction I have with students, or I would like you to come and watch me as I teach this one routine. So I think there's a number of other really important things to
mm,
remember that. And then I think above all, just because we've said it so many times here, is to to really make sure that you stay curious
Mm,
and stay present with other individuals. It's that the relationships are essential. But you have,
absolutely. Mm,
but you've got to keep uh, marketing yourself, staying connected with people, even for those who might be the most reluctant and resistant people. You think they'll never want to work with me. Well, there are probably reasons. Maybe they've had some kind of an experience, and that's why they're holdouts here. But
totally.
you
I
still
think
have to stay
I
connected.
think I think when I think about teachers here in New Zealand, I am going to generalize. They are fearful of coming into a coaching conversation more often
Mhm,
than not. And a
mhm,
part of
mhm.
that is where we're at in terms of implementation of different curriculum here at the moment, Daryl, but also they've had negative experiences
Yeah.
with
Mhm,
coaching in the
yeah.
past. And so, of course, the moment they hear that they're going to have a coaching session with someone, they sort of bring all that negative baggage with them because they don't
Yes.
know any better.
Yeah.
That is literally the template that they have to bring
Yeah.
with them. So it's
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
rewarding to have a coaching conversation with someone and they, oh my gosh, that was actually really enjoyable, or
Yeah.
and they are doing the majority of the talking, and it's a real privilege, isn't it,
Yeah. Yeah.
to have
Yeah.
that opportunity to sit and have a coaching conversation with people, and I
Yeah.
often say we learn just as much through the process.
Yes. Yeah, 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 yeah. And there too, when you think of how that might then become this individual who has the positive testimonials to share with
Mm,
others that, hey, working with the coach, this
mm,
is what happened. I mean, you're
mm,
building capacity really in other people that if you really want to
mm,
sustain a
yeah,
coaching model of some sort, then hey, keep working with
mm,
others and let them be the positive testimonial
yeah.
providers, those who, yeah, because it can't be once you're gone, everything falls apart.
Yeah,
Uh,
absolutely. Mm.
mhm.
Thank you so much, Daryl. I have found this chat really, really insightful. I've had the opportunity to listen. I've been reflecting on my own coaching practice immensely through the course of the conversation. And I'm very curious, and I can't wait to dive into my copy of student focused
That's
coaching,
great.
um, and and really, think about my own coaching practice,
Yeah,
and how I am really truly building more collaborative problem solving processes, how I'm, um, thinking about building a relationship with coachees where they are front and center and they
yeah,
feel like this is really about them and they
yeah.
enjoy and want to come back time and time again, to those coaching conversations. One of the things that I do want to share with you, we had a conversation, I don't know how long ago it was, maybe a month or so ago, and we just had that initial connect. And you mentioned to me about how in the student focused coaching model, that one of the forms of data gathering was where teachers might go into a classroom and they might, an individual teacher might be assigned an individual student just to
Yeah, yeah,
observe and
yeah,
see what that student is doing in the classroom. And then another
yeah,
teacher might observe another student in that same classroom and
yeah,
look at the various forms of engagement, how often the teacher acknowledged the student, how many opportunities to respond they had, and to consider how the learning setup is really, really enabling that student to feel valued and to participate and move forward with
yeah.
their learning. Well, I want to say thank you because I have had a little go with some of the
Ah,
teachers that I coach on beginning to explore that as another data
mhm.
source,
It's
when
great.
they are in and observing their colleagues, that they're not just watching what the teacher is doing,
Yeah,
but they're actually channeling and looking at
yeah.
what a particular student is gaining from that lesson. So I just wanted to
Mm,
share that as a thank you, but also for those that are listening too, when you talk about, different forms of gathering evidence. It was we There was some really rich dialogue as a result of
yeah,
those teachers.
Yeah.
watching those students. So thank you for that.
Yeah. And that allows, I think, for them to then take and say, hey, something I can use from what I just did is whatever.
Mm,
Without making even being in another classroom, making you seem like an observer, like Joyce and Showers and peer coaching is like
mm,
not so much the feedback giving, but what did you learn?
mm,
What can you use? Yeah.
mm,
So rich because it's all about the student behavior. Yeah.
mm. And it's very
Mm,
real, like the empathy that comes, I think, too. Well, that's what I
yeah.
observed, the empathy that comes from the teacher to the student. It's like all of a sudden they've put a different set of glasses on and they're just
Yeah.
seeing things literally through
Yeah.
through a different lens. It was incredibly powerful, Daryl. Yeah.
That's good.
Mm,
That's
yeah.
good. Well, if you ever need a partner there to do some coaching work in New Zealand, I'm all in.
Amazing.
Such a
Amazing.
beautiful place.
Thank you so much for your time and what is your
Yeah.
Sunday afternoon. It is invaluable to speak with people like you. For those people who are watching this chit chat, thank you so much for joining us. And we look forward to potentially seeing some of you, our followers, at our literacy, Cultivating the Literacy Landscape Symposia coming up in Wellington and Auckland in August. So that's it for us this afternoon. We're going to sign off. And wherever you're beaming in from, we wish that you are well and that you have taken an awful lot from the wise words of Daryl Michel. Thank you again, Daryl, for joining me.
You're welcome. Thank you.